Hi, Daniel. Thank you so much for joining us. First, we want to start with a quick elevator pitch of who you are and what you do.
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me. Big fan of Writer, big fan of the podcast. So I feel like I'm here and excited with all the celebs that I've seen digitally. A little bit about me. So I'm currently the VP of product marketing at a Gen AI company called Conveyor. And I like to say I'm the most accidental product marketer around. I'm an ex-engineer. I was a chemical engineer for a little while. I used to blow things up for the Navy. Worked in consulting for a number of years, and then found myself in business school at Salesforce, at another company called Gong, and also at Boston Consulting Group. And for some reason, all of those experiences led me to product marketing. It's a very exciting time to be in product marketing because it's a very technical discipline these days, but also you get to talk about really fun new technology. So that's a little bit about me and how I kind of arrived at this point at Conveyor.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are accidental marketers in general. And then in terms of just really leaning into the whole AI industry, it's one of those kind of disorienting moments where you're like, wait, how did we get here again? When did you first encounter AI in your personal life or professional life?
Sure. So obviously, 2022, we all learn about ChatGPT, the large language models, and by December of that year, you can go buy them on the premium plan. But I am unfortunately gray enough and old enough at this point to still remember when AI meant machine learning, and before that, when it meant big data. And I mentioned I was an engineer, and so the foundational levels of AI really started with how do we code in algorithms back when those algorithms consisted of things like nearest neighbors and latent Dirichlet allocation, all these fancy words that we now have collected into these broad terms of AI. And so I would say I learned about those in the mid 2000s. The fun thing about where we are with generative AI is that it is doing the same levels of getting smarter on top of older technology. And at each level of the new technology that comes now with generative, we are disassociating like the underlying nuts and bolts from what users and humans want to do. And so much like now machine learning has become kind of like not a relic of the past, but a thing that we all now take for granted. We are at that nice crossing of the chasm with generative AI, where as we start to use it for things that are higher value, higher up the context stack, we are getting a lot more actual value out of these things. And so my experience with AI in general, as much as it goes back many years, is also kind of like always evolving. And that's what's so fun about the generative space that we're in right now is that we have all of that history and we have a richness of all the things that we've learned, and we are constantly learning new things in the process. So it's humbling.
It is. It's humbling and intimidating and wonder-inducing. It's an amazing moment that we're at. Talk me through like just your day to day. How do you interact with AI, machine learning, or generative AI on a personal or professional basis?
Sure. So on a professional basis, I thankfully never have to touch a coding keyboard again on AI. I think all of our engineers would thank me for that for sure. As a marketer, I think that AI has incredible power for the amount of structuring that we need to do. So, a very common activity in marketing is you have an unstructured problem, and then you need to apply some structure to that. And so a good example is like, I need to develop thought leadership. Well, you might start by saying, well, I could develop a thought leadership asset. Why don't I point Gen AI at like an outline for a blog post, right? But the beauty of kind of all of the collective wisdom of the internet is how do I start a thought leadership program? And, historically, you might go search on Google, you might go to a private community, you might search on LinkedIn. It's now a great tool for doing all of that amount of research, but arriving with a more fully formed point of view before I need to go and do the extra legwork or take it that last mile. So I will commonly use tools like, a Writer, a Jasper, a Chat GPT, which allows me to interact with it. There are other really cool tools out there like copy.ai that allows you to like mimic the impact of being an AI powered SDR, sales development representative. And so I find that there's just a lot of greenfield space. And so as enterprises are thinking about developing and implementing generative AI solutions, I also find it incumbent upon us as marketers to be in the weeds. And so it's really nice to kind of experiment with those tools, find out where they're really good, and also recognize where they have lapses, because part of our role as marketers and leaders and trainers is to teach people how to use these things and integrate them with our own daily lives. And I can't ask somebody to go do that if I haven't myself actually integrated it in my own workflows, which I do.
Where are the big gaps that you're seeing, like where you wish AI could be but isn't there yet? Or, the opposite of that is, where is it just like the perfect tool for the moment?
There's a couple of areas where I'm always left wanting. The first is in true content generation. It sounds a little bland and over marketing. Like, I think we've all said, hey, write me a blog post, and it says, in the digital age, dot, dot, dot. And you're like, who speaks that way? And so that's fine, right? Because these things are starting to get crafted with tone and brand voice, and they're getting better at kind of mimicking how a human or a group of humans might actually communicate. Another area is research. And a thing that I love to use LLMs for is social proof. So, like, here's an example. You're a marketer and you have the great new slide deck, and you're like, hey, you know what I really need is like a Gartner quote, a McKinsey stat, something that comes from the Wall Street Journal or Forbes. And you can tell it, hey, like, you are the world's greatest research analyst. Go find me the best stats. And usually it will find some stuff and it's kind of close. You want it to be a little bit better. You know in your head, like, what resonates. And I think that is the next stage of really good marketing driven generative AI, is finding out the persuasive elements of generation. It's not enough to just craft something new that looks like all the old stuff. It's more human, I would say, to persuade. And that's what's really exciting about the next stages of those things coming.
That's definitely an area where we're developing the knowledge retrieval and RAG and things like graph-based RAG, where you can kind of train that LLM on company specific information. I sense that Conveyor is doing that at an RFP level, at a security questions level. Is that retrieval augmented generation happening there, or?
That's exactly right. So we similarly use RAG, and I know Writer is like leaps ahead when we're talking about like vector-based RAG and graph-based RAG, and thinking about all the ways that you can really optimize the pipeline. So, Writer does that for an enterprise in a variety of different use cases, and Conveyor does that specifically for security questionnaires and RFPs, and for anybody who's engaging in the security review process. And I'm sure, much like Writer, you've recognized there's so many of these tasks that are critical thinking, they're reading and they're writing. And so none of these companies could have ever existed at any point in time and up till now. And that's what makes this so fun, is for anything that is not just about a forecasting machine learning technology or predict the next, stock price, right? Like, those are old applications of AI. These new applications are like inside your brain. And that's what's really fun. It's like, we do graph-based RAG and vector-based RAG. We are not developing our own LLMs, much like Writer does, which are amazing. But much of what we are doing is using context to generate that knowledge graph and get really smart, really accurate, and really business context driven.
Yeah, it feels like that really is that gap. I think when it comes to, we call it the proof of concept purgatory at enterprise implementation of AI, is where you're like, okay, our team is experimenting, we're finding really cool use cases, but we can't connect it with our company's data. And that's where you also run into security issues and stuff like that. I think you have things to say about that first AI enterprise step. Yeah. Do you think that is the step, or talk to me a little bit more about that?
So what we find with a lot of our customers who are similarly enterprise level, I would say, is that, AI is both exactly what the C-suite wants everybody to deploy, and it is also the same technology that is scaring the C-suite and a lot of people. When AI gets deployed in the enterprise, we're finding two things that are happening that are really interesting. The first is that executives absolutely want their teams to experiment and deploy AI, but they are unsure how to do that always safely and accurately, kind of to the point around like a really well-defined RAG flow. And the third missing piece is that they need it to be connected to business impact. And so I think that as we think about deploying RAG and taking the first good enterprise AI step, we always need to start with the business impact first, right? Like just because the executive team and even the teams who are in the field on the ground understand that AI will change our workflows doesn't mean that we can deploy these if we don't have clear and measurable impact. And so one of the things that we've found with a lot of our customers is that any proof of concept or pilot has to start out with like a very clear and measurable KPI. And so for us, we look at security review, right? Like time kills all deals. And so we had a really big customer. This was, the largest human capital management software player. Start with a pilot. And they said, look, we're going to silo it down to the AMER sales team and pre-sales team who are supported by InfoSec. They are getting bogged down in big deals when it comes to security review, and time kills all those deals. And we want to measure not only what does the SLA turnaround look like, how do we go from 10 business days down to hours, but how do we actually measure the impact on win rates and deal velocity? And at the big deals, we're talking about any increase in sales velocity is having multi-million-dollar impacts. And when we're thinking about win rate, being able to get through kind of the muck of answering a question here and there and being able to communicate differentiation is really the key between whether or not you are likely to win on security or win on your product capability versus get bogged down in kind of like the back office muck of getting a deal done. And so by putting those three KPIs front and center, we had very clear and measurable impact stats as we started with the AMER team. And then as we could then prove value, move out to other elements like EMEA, LATAM, APAC, and then start to show a constant cycle of communication with the executive team. Look, this is the value we're driving. This is where we've had clear successes and failures in that pilot. And if we want to scale, these are like the go, no-go decisions on extra investment that we would put in order to realize more of that upside. And so this is like a classic consulting style exercise that you see at like the BCGs of the world. But the meat of it really is the same, no matter if you're deploying AI or if you're solving cost optimization somewhere. And so what we find is like we always connect it to the business impact. We then connect it back to that North Star of like where the company needs to go. And we finally make sure that we organize the field in such a way that they feel like this is working to their productivity benefit, quality of life. And it doesn't feel like, hey, we're just shoving in a new technology for the sake of it. It has to really have like internal feeling of like, this is making me better.
Yeah, that's something that I think, and I can't help but compare notes here, but our team at Writer, and just in terms of the entire business, realizes that this isn't just a plug and play type of moment, right? There has to be a level of consulting on the vendor side. And there also has to be a level of I think, fast adaptation on the enterprise side in terms of who can we turn into our AI program director here, who isn't just a technician. They are not a technologist. They are a business strategist, but can also understand they can map those key use cases and that strategy of deploying and implementing AI and measuring impact and marketing that impact to the rest of the org. Any stories from the front on your end when it comes to that?
Yeah, I would say the big thing that we notice is you have to win the hearts and the mind of the field first. People get excited about $1 billion number, right? Like you have to put that on a slide. You have to show that to the CFO and the CEO and say, we can go get $1 billion. But until you then connect that to what people feel on a daily basis, it gets really hard. And so one of the things that I get really excited about is we have one customer, Figma. They are so much fun to work with because their pre-sales engineering team is literally just taking all of these security questionnaires on because they are like the front lines of knowing technical information and selling. But the truth is, if you talk to most pre-sales engineers, they absolutely do not want to be filling out RFPs or security questionnaires. They got into that job because they want to be with customers. And so it became very clear right off the bat that as we started to think about what is the process of trusting a company, what is the security review flow need to look like where there is automation, we would quickly get into like the lowest levels of an organization as well as, the higher levels of buying segments. And the lowest levels are like, this is like the number one pain, right? And so the way that we always connect to hearts and minds is like we find the number one pain and we do everything in our power to go solve that. And we are simultaneously hyper focused about that pain too. So there's like 100 product areas that you could look at for generative AI. And, we are really focused on like 2 use cases right now. How do we solve security questionnaires and automate the B2B security review process? And how do we do the same thing for RFPs? And pre-sales engineers, like they feel that on a daily basis. And they're working cross-functionally with InfoSec teams and sales teams and, account managers. And so if we can take any of that off their plate and we can actually want them to like shout from the rooftop, this is so annoying, I don't want to do it anymore. Thank you to whatever vendor it is that can help me solve that problem. We think that like deploying those use cases and then shouting about it at the executive level becomes really powerful because we can let our users do that marketing for us.
That champion relationship is so important. When you've got the right relationship in place, you can help that person look like a hero beyond internally, right? You can give them a platform and say, this person is transforming and improving their career as a result of implementing this technology at their organization. If anybody's listening out there, make best friends with your favorite vendors because they can put you on keynote speaker stages and podcasts and all kinds of things. And your career can blossom along with your relationship with that vendor.
That's right. And what's so funny about it is like as marketers, sometimes we can come across as we're like, oh, this is a great customer. Let's elevate them because it makes us look really good. And it's kind of the opposite. It's like we love to do this because we love to solve problems and we love to elevate the people who have the problem in order to then champion a solution that it doesn't have to be like this. And so I love these kinds of customer stories, not because it's like, hey, let's get a great customer up there and we can like shout about it from the rooftops and make ourselves look great. It's because we can champion a problem and then we can find a way to solve it together. Because I don't think we have all the answers. Absolutely. It's really like we come up with good solutions because we have really excited customers. And I think like that partnership is really where all the secret sauce and all the fun happens.
Let me take a step back here from talking about AI. I want to talk about you for a second, Daniel. Your bio on Conveyor's website says Daniel is a failed engineer who ended up in product marketing. You talked us a little through that journey of your professional life, but I really want to dig into this because it says don't ask how. He still doesn't know, but it's by far his favorite job. I'm going to ask how. How did you go from chemical engineering to working at Conveyor as the VP of product marketing?
So it's that classic story that we've all heard. Boy goes to become chemical engineer. Boy works for the Navy to blow things up. Boy goes to consulting firm to go work for special forces, helping build all of their spy gear, and then product marketing. No, I'm kidding. There's that gap at the end is really interesting. So I was a chemical engineer. I thought I was going to go brew beer. That was my big plan. It turned out I was not so good of a chemical engineer, but I was pretty good still at the problem solving side of things. And so every little lost engineer, it seems, when they have to go to Neverland and get a job and they're not that good at being an engineer, goes into consulting. And so I went to a company called Booz Allen Hamilton. And at this point, I ended up with a security clearance by interning with the Navy. And so through that process at the time, I ended up with a top secret security clearance with what's called SCI, Special Compartmentalized Organization. And that then allows you to do some really cool things in the US government. So for 5 years, I worked for Special Forces doing their tagging, tracking, and locating technology. And the thing that I would tie of like that experience with product marketing is that when you understand the lowest levels of technology, you can talk about them at like a high and a low level of value. You start to develop a little bit of a superpower of like, I wasn't a good engineer, but I could talk about the technology and I understood it really well. And so as I go to business school and I think about what am I going to do next, I realized, hey, tech is like absolutely the place that I want to be. And I very much lucked into a job with Salesforce in the pricing strategy department. And pricing, I say now and will forever say, is the best training ground for any product marketer. Because at Salesforce, it was the make money department. Truly, every day you had to develop like a business case for like launching new SKUs. How do we package? What is the price of a new package that we come up with? And you are really selling, you are marketing, and people care most about price than almost any other topic. And so by doing that, you learn a lot about what is the value of that thing that we're selling? What is the benefit of that thing that we're selling? And also, what's the underlying technology that's driving it? How can I talk about it in a unique and differentiated way? And so by doing that, I then develop, I would say, like a really good skill set around not just the economics, but the technology and the marketing. Those things then flow into my time at BCG, where I worked only on monetization problems, my time at Gong, where I ran the pricing and the packaging strategy, and eventually the product marketing too. And now at Conveyor, where I actually own all of product marketing. And so I would say those experiences all totally link together if I look in the rearview mirror. And I would never counsel anyone to do that journey at all, because I don't know how you would actually.
What do you think the hook is there, though? Like, what is it that like makes you lean in on these? You said I love solving a problem, right? You're a problem solver. Why? Why are you like? What is it that you love about a good problem?
I think that, the basic answer, everyone will say curiosity, right? Like you're going to, you ask that question to 9 out of 10 people, I bet they say curiosity. And I think that's absolutely a factor. But I also think it's about finding meaning in the impact. And there's something about like when we do work, we always want to connect it to impact and find a way, not just to say like I did that thing, but to say like, was my time, was my effort, was the partnership worth it? The juice, was it worth the squeeze? And I would say like it's been a lifelong exercise in finding lemons and deciding, are these good lemons to squeeze, right? Because we have so much time on this planet. We want to solve big problems. We want to feel like our job did something, like we made the world better. And so I would say it probably starts with curiosity, but it's also about finding impact that you feel like when you look back in the rearview mirror, did I do something that mattered? Did I help other people? Did I leave some sort of lasting legacy beyond just Daniel? Did I help create a group of people who can go do great things in that wake too? And I'm not saying that I've done any of that, but I think that's absolutely the North Star.
On the same wavelength when it comes to that. Solving a good problem, yes, rolling up your sleeves and getting in there is fun, but what makes it meaningful is absolutely that impact, that leaving your mark on the world in a positive way. Can we find a connection between that and navigating the alignment within AI in an organization? Because man, I'm seeing those meaningful impact moments at Writer with our customers. But I also feel like the challenge for these customers is how do you communicate that beyond your team to the organization?
I've always had the feeling that when we're looking for, where is juice worth the squeeze, you obviously have to start with like that big, hairy, audacious goal. But when I think about cross-functional alignment at the enterprise level, an old mentor of mine at BCG used to say, there is only one problem in business, and that problem is change management. And so I think it's one thing as we think about scaling generative AI in the enterprise, we have to get to the right levels of power and identify the big, hairy, audacious goals. We have to align that to a number. But all of our effort, everything that we do, and we find whether or not a problem is worth solving, comes down to change management. So when I think about the alignment problem of change management, I start to decompose that into who are the right stakeholders, and you want the minimum number that is also like the maximum number of decision makers, right? Like, so in the Conveyor use case, we want 3. We want like the VP of sales, we want the head of sales engineering, and senior director of infosec, possibly the CISO as well, right? The minimum number of people who can make a decision. And we also want to find a problem that is cross-functional that almost no one could solve internally, either because it is not so much of a priority that you would put a center of excellence around it, but not so low of a priority that the dollars don't justify the impact. And so we try to find that nice middle zone of like, it's got to be an enterprise problem. It's got to have the right committee of people. And then we've got to also find a way to like make sure that the right amount of juice, like as a vendor, we can help prioritize that as an internal problem. Ultimately, for these companies who are looking at cross-functional and alignment problems, what you need is trust. And you need to trust the people who are coming in who are saying like, we're not doing this just because we can make a buck. We're doing it because we actually see this problem all over the place and we finally figured out the solution. And yes, there's economic upside and there's always like a share on value, but the truth is we just want to find a way to solve a really hard problem for customers who have pain all day long.
I feel like AI has the potential to be a trust building tool as well, right? How can you like turn trust into a scalable solution, I guess is the question. How can you make it scalable, right?
The example that I always love from Salesforce, I mean, every day at Salesforce, you would hear the one value and you would hear it at every single offsite. You would hear it at every single company presentation. They would say, trust is our number one value. And that's kind of an odd value to have for a company that big that does so many different things. And it always resonated with me because it was always calling out that must be the North Star. And so when we ask like, how do you scale trust? Well, I think it starts with like calling it out as your number one priority and as your North Star. And it doesn't mean that we will always live up to all of the expectations, but it does mean that we are holding ourselves accountable. So as I think about the micro blocks in place of generating a trustworthy entity or a trustworthy company, it's about saying like, we hold that value to be number one. A good example of the opposite, we saw Google Gemini, they had a really big misstep when they were generating ahistorical figures and they had good intentions, right? But they fell short of where they wanted to be and probably where the market expected them to be as well. And I would say it's a good example of saying, as we talk about trust in AI, there is no point in technological history that we've had to hold this high of a standard. And so what I love about where we are with scaling trust is like, we need to talk about it. We need to call it out as our number one value. And then we have to hold ourselves accountable. So I can't say that I sit here today knowing every answer of like, what are the nitty gritty actions that we need to generate more trust? But I certainly think it starts with better communication around when we fail. And it certainly starts with a good goal around what is the benchmark for how we're going to hold ourselves accountable. And then only then can we actually say like we are achieving scalability and trust.
We're in that very awkward growth moment as an industry, right? If we're talking about that hype cycle, there are people that are in that trough of despair when it comes to just figuring all of this out. And trust could be that little rope to help them out. But it also has to be earned. You were at Gong, for example, and Gong is very much about driving that sales experience, and building trust through those conversations. Any lessons from that on building trust?
What's interesting, I always thought about Gong is we attacked like the core problem of revenue intelligence and conversation intelligence from the point of view of like all of the integrated workflows. And an interesting thing at Gong was always that we never talked in the early days about the AI. And I thought it was always interesting how customers would say to us, unprompted, it was never part of our product marketing or sales pitch. They would say, hey, the AI is really good. And I think an interesting thing about trust is to flip the problem sometimes. And you see a lot of marketing right now around like AI is like 50% accurate, 80% accurate, 100% accurate. It's like, it's hard to trust a lot of those claims. The opposite approach is to say, look, we're solving an integrated workflow problem. It's powered by AI. It works really well. We encourage you to put it to the test. And then it's much less about saying like, are we at 88% or 91% on the AI accuracy? And rather, are we solving the workflow? Is the AI getting better over time? And are we holding ourselves accountable to a standard that is like productivity? And I really like that as like the early days of Gong was saying, hey, let's not like oversell on accuracy at this point. That's not what customers are buying. They're buying a benefit. And I think it's both a great place where we are with the generative AI is like we're competing on accuracy. We are holding ourselves to like 100% standards. But we always have to remember it's like it's about the personal benefit, the personal workflow, and the integration of those workflows in order to drive productivity and revenue impact. And so Gong really found a way in the early days to find a way to unlock the visibility of that workflow. And then talk a little bit more about what made the AI unique as the market matured.
You talked about boy meets chemical engineering, boy meets product marketing, but where do you think that what do you think the through line is here? Do you think it's about that impact, or is there another theme that you're seeing?
I think so much about one particular boss. I'll call him out, and I hope to send him this at some point, Glenn Deering. And Glenn was the SVP of pricing strategy at Salesforce for probably a decade plus. He now runs pricing and corporate strategy at a company called UKG. And he taught me everything that I firmly believe now about being a player coach. And when I think about the through line of my life today, in the old days, and what will soon be my future looking back well into retirement, it is that I hope to always be remembered as a player coach. And it's because I learned from what I think is the best player coach in the business with Glenn. And what that looked like and what it meant to me was you could never disassociate yourself so far from the work that you couldn't teach people. If you wanted to hire A players, if you wanted to be around A players, if you wanted to cultivate them, it meant that you needed to teach them, you needed to coach them. And that was incumbent upon you as a leader to know the skills and to be a master in order to then teach others so that you could develop a whole wake of people who find themselves owing their careers to you. So I owe my career in many ways to Glenn. And I would also say that it also forces you to never get so far removed from like the essence of what's happening on the front lines that you're not intimately familiar with like the pains that people are experiencing as like a servant leader. Like you need to know it, you need to feel it, you need to do it. And so I think the through line in my life will always be being a player coach. And even though sometimes as you get higher up in your career, it looks a lot more like coach than like player, you always have to find yourself back at like that center, that ground zero of like, I am still a player at heart. I still do the work so that I can coach on the work. And I believe I will never, ever lose that, I hope.
Yeah, I'm also connecting the dots here between player coach and what kind of characteristics you're going to need as we enter this era of AI. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
You really do have to have intimate understanding of the problems in your organization and how they're impacting like even the lowest level employee, understanding that pain point in order to introduce that solution and say, hey, and make that decision, right? Are you seeing that as you're talking with customers at Conveyor?
Absolutely. I mean, when I think about domain expertise, when we walk into a customer, like we get to tell them we do this internally for ourselves. And we've had some successes and we've absolutely had some failures too. And we're very public about that. One of the things that we're really good at learning about with generative AI is like, as we discussed earlier, it's not a panacea for every problem. But the way that we learn is by failing at a lot of those use cases in order to generate really high intuition and confidence when we pitch a particular set of use cases. And so I view that in the same light as being a player coach, which is I can't possibly be a consultant to our best customers or give them good recommendations if I can't be as public about our failures as our successes.
Tell me about the first time you used generative AI.
First time I used generative AI, November 2022. It had just dropped, and I thought, I need to write a poem for a friend's birthday party, and it was not particularly good. But it was also so good that I was blown away that, wow, the future is here already.
What was the prompt that you used?
I said, write a poem about Lake Tahoe, and I had a bunch of personal details in there that I will not share right now because they would be embarrassing to my friend.
What's your favorite way to use AI at the moment?
I love using AI as a research bot. I love it to search really high impact sources like Gartner, IDC, Forrester. I want it to generate social proof. I want it to come up with quotes. And I love connecting it to my core business problem and market education in order to quantify impact by third parties. Research bots, underrated use case right now for AI.
And what's your dream AI capability?
My dream AI capability are AI agents. These are going to become all the rage in the next probably 1 to 4 or 5 years. And they look like little systems of organizations that are doing work autonomously and that are constantly checking their work. I kind of describe it as like a little army of interns who have some smart managers, and those smart managers have a smart leader. And we are all going to have our own little army of leader, managers, and interns. And I can't wait to watch how we can force all of those bots and agents in a specific direction. We can monitor them and we can guide them. So getting back to player coach, I see this as like a really exciting new development as we think about Devin or all these other really cool tools that are agentic AI.
What's the first thing you're going to do with an AI agent once you have one?
I'm going to use it to set my out of office so that it can do all of my work and I can go to Tahiti.
There you go. Thank you so much for joining us today, Daniel.
Thank you so much, Alaura. This was really great. I appreciate Ryder and I really love the technology and I just appreciate the time too.